All right, so welcome back. This is Chapter 8, Macroeconomics, Professor Joyce, Econ1001. We are now into a lot more policy kind of analysis. I think it's really exciting. We're going to look at taxes, good, bad, and different. However, we're going to devise a system to evaluate it. That's how economists think about these things, all right? And we're going to use these concepts of consumer and producer surplus to really help us make sense of what the impact in this particular chapter is of taxes. All right. Okay. First question here, then you quiz. Hope you've downloaded this. It says taxes cause deadweight losses because. Taxes cause deadweight losses because. All right. So I have drawn a typical situation. Right. We've got initial supply curve S0, initial demand curve D0. The initial equilibrium would be Q0. The government now imposes a tax on this good, which causes what's a per unit tax, let's say of $2 on each good. It causes the supply curve to shift back by the amount of the tax. So there's a parallel shift. And this blue line here, if you can see it, let's say that's the amount of the tax. Okay? So now, after the tax, the new equilibrium, consumers paying a higher price, they don't like it, so they only consume Q1 units. All right? Suppliers only supply Q1 units. So here's where the suppliers go. Here's where the consumers go. All right? So that tells us that we've cut back our quantity demanded. The deadweight loss is the triangle right here. We've done in the lecture. That triangle right there is what we call the deadweight loss. So now the question is, and I'm sure you know this from reading and from listening in class, but now they're going to ask us specific questions about that. So it says, taxes cause deadweight loss because A, they reduce the sum of producer and consumer surpluses by more than the amount of the tax revenue. Whoa, that's a mouthful. All right, so wait a minute, what's it saying? So let's look at it. What was consumer surplus before the tax? That was this area down to the equilibrium point over to P0 and up. So it's this triangle right there is consumer surplus before the tax. Producer surplus before the tax. That is, go to the market price, look at the supply curve, the difference between price and the supply curve tells us the producer surplus. So this whole big triangle right here is the producer and consumer surplus before the tax. Now the tax is imposed. All right? Consumers cut back the quantity demanded. Suppliers supply less. Now at the tax raises the price to P1. So now we know this consumer surplus is only this area right here. At the same time, the producer surplus, this is what the market says is being purchased. This is the price paid by consumers. The supplier must give this much to the government. That's the sales tax, right? That's what you pay when you go in New York City. It's 8.88%. So you give that percent or that amount to the government. The supplier ends up with less. That's what the supplier ends up with. So the supplier's surplus is this P naught or P star, P dash, over to here, down here. So there's the producer surplus after the tax, okay? What happens to this triangle in the middle? This crossed hatch area right here is tax revenue. This is what the government takes in. Why? Well, look at it. How many units are being sold? We're selling these many units in this market. What's the tax per unit? It's this blue line right there. Therefore, this rectangle right here represents the government's tax revenue after the tax. Okay? So who loses? Well, again, the government is us. So in essence, the government's going to take that tax money and put it back into building schools like Baruch, paying my salary, putting me in this building. Okay? So your tax money goes back to us as a form of surplus. So we don't consider taxes, in that case, bad because they're going back for medical care, for education, for roads, etc. But something does happen here. And the dotted area is what we call the deadweight loss. This represents the value of transactions that don't happen. What I mean? All this demand curve right here says there are consumers who are willing to pay more than P0 to have this good. And this bottom part here says there were suppliers who were willing to supply the good because their costs were lower than the market price of P0, but now those transactions don't happen. So this area is the value of lost transactions that don't occur because of the tax. We call that the deadweight loss. All right? I know you know this, but let me just remind you so we go back to this question. It says, taxes cause deadweight losses because taxes reduced the sum of producer-consumer surpluses by more than the amount of the tax revenue. So, how much was consumer and producer surplus reduced? It was reduced by this, this, and this. This whole area, this rectangle, plus the deadweight loss area, represents the producer surplus and consumer surplus combined that was lost because of the tax. What was gained? Well, the government gains this rectangle right here. Nevertheless, the tax revenue that the government gains is less than the sum of the consumer and producer surplus that is lost because of the tax. Therefore, answer A is correct. Answer A. Keep going. We've got a problem that says all the above are correct, so you always have to check all of them. B. Prevents buyers and sellers from realizing some of the gains from trade. Well, that's what I was just trying to imply to you, right? Remember, this little triangle right here represents consumers who are willing to pay more than the market price and want to buy the good. They value it but more than P0. And this represents producers who are willing to supply it because their costs are less than the market price. These transactions don't happen, which makes B correct. Again, prevent buyers and sellers from realizing some of the gains of trade. So that B is also correct. So now you know where we're headed. C. Causes marginal buyers and sellers to leave the market, causing the quantity sold to fall. These people just near the edge of the market price, we call them marginal buyers. Why? Because if the price changes a little bit, that marginal buyer is going to leave the market. So these marginal buyers left the market, these marginal sellers left the market, equilibrium quantity fell from Q0 to Q1. So, ladies and gentlemen, answer C is also correct. All right? Causes the marginal buyers and sellers to leave the market, causing the quantity sold to fall. Perfectly correct answer. Ergo, D is the answer. All the above are correct. So again, nice problem. I like this. You're likely to see this in an exam. Why? Because it forces you to really penetrate the concepts of deadweight loss, consumer surplus, producer surplus, tax revenue, all in one problem. I like it. I'll be back for the next problem in a minute.